Hi, this is the second video in this series on disorders of childhood and adolescence. And in this video, we're going to talk about the types of disorders of childhood. And, the DSM in the past used to include a lot of disorders. It doesn't even have the category anymore. It used to have a category called disorders of childhood and adolescence. I'm still using that because I like to think that way. But the DSM has, like I said before, like with both mood disorders and with anxiety disorders, it has now separated out a lot of disorders and given them their own category. So eating disorders and neurodevelopmental disorders and behavior disorders, those all used to go under disorders of childhood and adolescence. And now they have separate categories, of course. So, let's talk about the types of mental illness that we might see in childhood. These are mental illnesses that you would see in adults. Some are more and some are less common in children. And when we talk about children, of course, we have to talk about, we need to separate between young children and older children because a 5-year-old and a 17-year-old are very different creatures, as you know. So some mental illnesses are not that uncommon in childhood, in young childhood. So we talked about this with OCD. It's not unusual to see OCD in a 3 or 4-year-old. It can start very, very young. We see other anxiety disorders in young children, and they're not uncommon at all. Separation anxiety, phobias are common. Like phobias of the dark, that's a common one. A lot of phobias. And selective mutism, which is complicated, but could be a result of trauma, could be an anxiety disorder. Mood disorders are less common in young children. It's pretty unusual, for example, to see bipolar disorder in a very young child, in a 5 or 6-year-old, and it's very difficult to diagnose too, but not as uncommon in a 16-year-old. You might see it as commonly in a 16 or 17-year-old as you would in adults. Psychosis and schizophrenia are much less common in young children. Schizophrenia and disorders of involving psychosis tend to develop late teens, early 20s. Eating disorders, you're going to see, of course, in teenagers, particularly girls. So starting with puberty, but we also see them much younger. 9-year-old girls, 10-year-old girls, even even these prepubescent girls, we might see eating disorders. Much less common in boys. About 95% of people with eating disorders are women. And it depends on how you count that, because we'll leave that. We'll leave that for now. Trauma disorders, of course, you're going to see those in children. They're going to overlap with every single other kind of disorder that you see here, whether it's sleep, mood, substance, eating, anxiety, OCD, all of those could be related or associated with trauma. Sleep disorders, resistance towards going to sleep, nightmares, night terrors, sleepwalking. It's less common to see hyposomnia in young children. That typically is not a problem. Children do sleep a lot, and like we said before, developmentally, it's appropriate for a child to sleep, 12 hours a night and then take a nap if they're young. Substance disorders, we're going to see, of course, in teens and younger teens and older teens, and of course much less frequently in very young children. The neurodevelopmental disorders and behavior disorders, like I said, those are new categories that separate out what is thought to be developmental and biological brain neurological issue as opposed to something that is behavioral or conduct oriented. The reason that these are important to distinguish, there are a few reasons, but one of the big ones is treatment, and particularly medication. So when we see neurodevelopmental disorders, we're much more likely to consider medication, which we should not be considering as a first recourse for behavioral disorders. That shouldn't be the first go-to. Whereas with neurodevelopmental disorders, it's much more likely. And the separation here is really to discourage the use of medication for behavioral disorders. So this is probably a good thing. In the neurodevelopmental disorders, we see, and we're going to talk about these specifically in this series, ADHD, autism spectrum, chromosomal. Of course, there are neurological disorders as a result of injuries, brain injuries, and the learning disabilities are also under neurodevelopmental disorders. We also see behavioral disorders, and these are conduct and oppositional defiance. I put DMDD, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, which we have a separate video for that in mood disorders. I put it in here because it is both mood and behavior, and it is actually one of the disorders that was created to separate mental illness, particularly bipolar disorder, from a mood disorder that should not be medicated. Let's just put it that way. And that's why I put it under behavioral disorders. And in DMDD, we see a lot of tantrums, which was also why. Here I put it in behavioral disorders, but you'll also see it in mood disorders. Okay, and I'm going to stop this video here.